morning again. Welcome to Life Point Crossing. My name's Ross. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to James as we continue through James for the summer here. Have you ever noticed? I don't know. It seems to me like it's the craziest thing. But everybody is always certain that Jesus agrees with them. That's true, right? Like maybe not for hardcore atheists or self-described Satanists. Those are both very, very small groups of people. Pretty much anybody else, whatever they think or believe, they're certain that Jesus is on their side. Some people will say that if you see something even maybe that's wrong, you should never rock the boat, don't cause any trouble. Don't you know that Jesus said to turn the other cheek? And he did. And other people will say that if you see something that isn't right, someone needs to cause some ruckus and make things right. Don't you know that Jesus, he went into the temple, he saw some messed up stuff, he started flipping tables over, and he did. Some people say that anybody, whatever the situation, we just need to love and accept with no expectation or any change ever at any case, because so many times Jesus was so kind and so compassionate to hurting sinful people, and he was repeatedly. And other people will say that you have to say the hard truth. Jesus said hard things. He was willing to let people just walk away if they didn't like it or couldn't deal with it. And he did, repeatedly. People will say, don't judge. Jesus said not to judge. He did. Other people say, well, right, but that sounds kind of judgy, for one, and also really what he was pretty obviously saying was to not be a judgmental hypocrite, arrogant, and so that, of course, in fact, really the case, but then it's pretty easy to be self-righteous about understanding that properly, and so now that's still hard. I don't know, but I've found at least 20 of these with all sorts of things, some of them simple and some of them convoluted, but this one I picked just because it was simple and fun. But Jesus took naps. Be like, Jesus, Bible verse. Sure, like, whatever it is that you think or want to believe or promote, like there's someone, like you're going to believe that Jesus is on your side. And the Bible has a lot to say also about wisdom, and the same way that sometimes it seems like these different sort of positions on Jesus or things that Jesus might be for or against or God might be for or against or would handle a certain way, sometimes maybe conflict with each other, sometimes also wisdom conflicts with each other. You've all heard the phrase conventional wisdom. The reason that's a phrase is to differentiate it from unconventional wisdom. And so, of course, conventional wisdom is whatever is generally agreed upon as good and commonly accepted. And a lot of the times it's right and helpful. Sometimes it's wrong. I don't know how long ago it was or it changed, but it used to be if you were working in the kitchen and you got a burn, conventional wisdom said to put some butter on it. I guess your burn wasn't delicious enough. I don't know what the thinking was. But somewhere along the way, society came to understand that that's not beneficial. In fact, if you do that, the butter acts as an insulator and the burn will be worse than if you did nothing at all. And so now what was conventional wisdom has become unconventional, and what was unconventional has now replaced it as conventional wisdom. And it's fun how that works out, isn't it? So here's a real challenge, especially if you're not as wise as you could be. Is how do you tell what wisdom is wise and what's foolish? For generations, people put butter on burns, but it wasn't the right thing to do. And Scripture has nothing to say, of course, about how to treat burns. But how do you know if something that you see, think, hear, read, have someone tell you, is this really good, godly wisdom? Is it something that just kind of sounds good or is cleverly stated? Well, James for today has us covered. Here's how we start out in James chapter 3. If you are wise and understand God's ways, prove it. This is going to be the evidence, is by living an honorable life, doing good works with the humility that, actually, this is interesting, where does the humility come from? Like, if you're wise, all right, so this is presuming you're wise, here's what your wisdom has produced actually is humility. And there's really, in just this one sentence, there's so much here and really several things that James has already talked about and that we've already talked about. A couple weeks ago, we had a message on faith, and if your faith isn't the kind of faith that bubbles over into actually affecting the way that you live, then it might not be worth as much as you would like to think. But if you are wise and understand God's ways, in my observation, most people would say, oh yeah, well that's me. Like for sure, everything that I started off by talking about, where people would maybe have different views on what Jesus would think of something, but they all were sure that Jesus would agree with them. Like for sure, that's because you're wise and you understand God's ways, right? For sure better than the people who believe the other thing. And honestly, it can be really frustrating being like one of the only wise and understanding people in a world full of just foolishness and ignorance, isn't it? I don't know if you've ever thought something like this, but honestly, probably most of us have. Probably you've at least seen any number of whatever, bumper stickers, t-shirts, for sure social media posts that maybe some of us have even liked or shared. If it's you, I don't remember, so don't worry about it, but don't raise your hand and definitely don't point. But if you've at least thought, yeah, you know what, I get it, I can relate to this, but you see things like this. I'm allergic to stupidity. Break out in sarcasm, that's me very, very nicely put together, but all this stupidity around me just creates different things in me, and it's very, very frustrating to live with. Idiots everywhere. How am I so cursed as to live around people who are so much more foolish than I am? And then here, this one's actually my favorite of those that I picked out. You know that I could have 50 of these if we had longer, but I see stupid people. They're everywhere. They walk around and they don't even know they're stupid. And so, of course, whoever is posting these or liking these or wearing the t-shirt it's on or whatever, they don't see themselves as the stupid people, of course. They don't even think about the fact that, oh no, what if I'm the stupid person that doesn't realize that I'm the stupid person? Because they're all very convinced, we're generally all very convinced, aren't we, that we are the wise person, we're the smart person. Well, but how do you know? Well, according to the verse that we just saw from James, it actually has less to do with your social media posts and more to do with, what did it say? It says it'll be proven, it'll be evident by living an honorable life. And what did it say? The humility that comes from wisdom. Right? If you really are wise and understand God's ways, that wisdom produces humility. So if your wisdom says that it makes you like kind of condescending toward all of the other people around you who are just not on your level of wisdom and intelligence, that wisdom, that's not from God. No, the wisdom that comes from God, it creates humility. Isn't that interesting? And so he says, but if you are bitterly jealous and there's selfish ambition in your heart, and we're going to see these two words, jealous and selfish, several times here just in the next couple of verses. Well, don't cover up the truth with boasting and lying, for here they are again, jealousy and selfishness, also not God's kind of wisdom. Do you ever hear yourself explaining away other people's success? Like, especially if it's maybe someone who's been in competition with you or somebody who, for whatever reason, you just don't like, and it's never that they worked hard and made good decisions in humility and wisdom. It's always something that was either unethical or just pure luck. Yes, their business grew better than mine did, but it's because they used deceptive advertising. I mean, I could have grown also if I was willing to lie to my customers like they did. Sure, she got the promotion. It's obviously because she's good looking and she flirts with the boss. We all know, everybody knows that's what it is. Yeah, my team lost, but it's because of the officials. This one's actually true sometimes. I don't know about your team, but for sure my team. But no, like we could have won. We probably should have won, but it was the officials. This even happens with churches and ministries. It's kind of funny to me. If there's a church that's like fairly gentle, that does well and experiences growth or what we would call or what looks like success, then you have people say, well, it's because they water down the message of Jesus. Yeah, it's easy to draw a big crowd. A whole bunch of people are going to come if you just tell them whatever they want to hear. And then if there's a church that's like a lot more hardcore that grows or has what we would see or call success, then those people that go there, they just like to be told what to believe, and they're just really comforted by not having to think for themselves and the simplicity of the black and white. And so it's interesting to me that like it's all of the answers for everybody else and all the excuses for myself, which is kind of a gross way to say it, right? But what James calls selfishness and jealousy, I mean, tell me if those aren't fairly common in our world and in our society, and if maybe even that could be us, because you guys, here's the difficulty with these things are so difficult to see in ourselves. They're almost always blind spots, probably honest blind spots, right? You just can't see it in yourself, but part of what that means is, it might be us. Like it might be me. How familiar does this sound to you? How quickly would this roll off of your tongue, or how comfortable would this thought be in your mind? And you can fill in the blank with anything, just about anyone. Like, well, what they need to do is just, and fill in the blank. It doesn't even matter. If it's someone who does well, yeah, of course. Well, but again, that's because they were either unethical or just got lucky. If it's someone who struggles, well, I mean, it's because they did this and this, and really what they just need to do is that, and it's pretty obvious. I don't know why they don't do it, if they're just lazy or they're not very smart or whatever their situation is. But me, I have some particular challenges, okay? You got to understand. There are some things that make it more difficult for me. I've had some really bad luck. I had some people that did me wrong, and so I have all the answers for everybody else and all the excuses for myself. And if that doesn't sound familiar to you, at least with the world around us, I don't know. Does that feel a little bit familiar? Is it possible maybe that could be us? Well, such things, James says, are earthly, unspiritual. Here's a hard word, demonic. For wherever there's, and here we see it again, jealousy and selfish ambition, there you'll find disorder, evil of every kind. And now happily, finally, James turns around a little bit and we get to the good stuff. He says, but the wisdom from above, right? Wisdom from God. Here's what that is first of all, it's pure. It's also peace-loving, gentle at all times, willing to yield to others. Here's what it's full of, it's full of mercy and good deeds. How conventional wisdom does this sound? If you're telling somebody, a friend, spouse, coworker, whoever, about maybe an interaction you had with someone and you really felt like you kind of got disrespected, and so you tell them and they say, well, here's what I would have said, here's what you should say, here's what you should have said was, and then it's something that, of course, is of the generally hit back harder variety. Well, I know your pride got stung, and that stings, but there's nothing mentioned here that says anything about defending your pride, is there? And in fact, if the wisdom is to hit back harder, then that's, in fact, what James is calling actually earthly, unspiritual, demonic. If that sounds like wisdom to you, James tells us exactly where that kind of wisdom is and is not coming from. Wisdom from God is, it's pure, it's peace-loving, it's gentle at all times. If you want to be gentle at all times, when you have to choose to be gentle? It's when you don't want to be gentle. Everyone's gentle with a puppy. It's adorable, it's tiny, it's fragile, it loves you. You're either gentle with a puppy or you're a monster. How about when Raider fan shouts bad things about Patrick Mahomes in the parking lot? Now it's a little harder. How about when that coworker, they stole your sale again? Didn't they do that last week too? Now she's flirting with your boyfriend. She knows you're together. She knows he's with you. Now you don't want to be gentle. Now you want to tear into somebody. But the wisdom that says to hit first or to hit back harder, James tells you exactly where that is and isn't from. And it says it's full of mercy. Do you guys know what mercy is? Mercy is when somebody does not get what they really should, what they really have earned and deserved. Mercy is somebody getting off the hook for something negative. And our God is a God of justice. But he is also a God of mercy. And if you're here as a follower of Jesus, every one of us has accepted and received that mercy. And through Jesus, we don't get what we have earned. And so, again, the wisdom that says, okay, well, whatever they did to me, they're going to get that right back. And maybe with a little extra, right, just so they know. That's not wisdom from God. It's full of mercy. God says go the other way, peaceful, gentle, willing to yield to others. And just to say it, right, I don't think this means that there are absolutely no times or no exceptions where it can be good or right to stand up for yourself or others. If you're at the front of a long line and someone comes to cut in front of you, that's disadvantaging all of the people behind you. That's a much greater injustice than it would be for you. You can gently and kindly assert yourself. I think that's okay. Certainly, this isn't saying that if you or somebody else is in some sort of an abusive situation, then you just need to yield to others all the time, every time, without any sort of thought or discernment. No, of course not. But don't let the exceptions or the possible abuses of the principle rob you of the truth and application of the principle. Loving, gentle, full of mercy and good deeds. It says it shows no favoritism. Okay? It's always sincere. And those who are peacemakers, what do peacemakers do? How do you know they're peacemakers? Well, they plant seeds of peace and then reap a harvest of righteousness. I don't know how many people would really self-identify as peacemakers or say, yeah, that's what I am. I'm a peacemaker. But I am suspicious that almost nobody would say they're a troublemaker, right? But you look around, what do you see? Trouble. Well, if there are no troublemakers, where's all the trouble coming from? Who's making the trouble? And like honestly, I feel like probably a huge portion of it comes from honest misunderstandings, where then just nobody is willing to yield to others and be a peacemaker because they're following the earthly, unspiritual, demonic wisdom of hit back harder, maybe even with a little bit extra. And then even when a slight or an offense really is legitimate, which certainly does also happen, right? Even when it is real, then the person who's going to reciprocate or escalate is following what James calls the wisdom of demons. If you want to be a peacemaker, here's what you have to do, is you have to plant seeds of peace. Peacemakers will plant seeds of peace, which is, by the way, an active, like proactive. This is something that you're doing. You're not walking by a field, like kind of vaguely hoping that some peace is going to grow up over there and not some gross weeds, right? But you're actually doing something to plant the seeds of peace. And if you're not planting seeds of peace, then I don't know really however you think of yourself or identify yourself, but I'm not sure that really that you're a peacemaker, which is interesting because doesn't everybody say that they want peace? Of course they do, but how many people do you see who are actively planting peace? And of course the answer is going to be not nearly as many. So whoever you are, however you think of yourself, whatever you're reaping or harvesting, I think is a pretty good clue as to what you've been planting. If you feel like, I don't know, I'm a peacemaker, but trouble just follows me around. It's the craziest thing, and it just keeps happening. I don't know. You might not be a peacemaker. If you say, well, I'm a peacemaker, I'm just the kind of peacemaker that's also going to stand up for myself. Well, James says you might really not be a peacemaker. If you're not planting peace, then you're not making peace. And if you're not making peace, then it's pretty hard to consider yourself a peacemaker, isn't it? Again, obvious, almost never happen, and ridiculously unlikely situations can be accepted. If someone breaks into your home and they're going to hurt your family, then okay, do what's appropriate. It's a fallen world. Sometimes kindness and negotiation aren't enough. All right. But the wisdom that says to hit first isn't from God. The wisdom that says, I'm going to get mine and just let the chips fall where they may, that's not from God. I know you have to break some eggs to make an omelet, but if your business plan or your dating life or heaven forbid your ministry plan is looking at people like they're eggs and it's time for breakfast, that is not the wisdom from God. It's earthly, unspiritual, demonic. If you're wise and understand God's ways, then here's how this comes out, is living an honorable life, right, with the humility that comes from wisdom. And it says that it's going to be peace-loving and gentle at all times, full of mercy and good deeds. It has no favoritism. It's always sincere. And peacemakers, because they're peacemakers, what they're going to be doing is sowing seeds, planting seeds of peace and then harvesting righteousness. So how do you do this, right? Like real world, just a couple simple ideas. Keep in mind, simple does not always, and in fact, usually does not mean easy. I'm not saying any of this is easy. This is difficult, but some simple things. Here's how you do this. I think number one is always the first thing I think of is forgive. Man, do you think forgive would make some peace? Oh, goodness. And if you've been here, not that long ago, we did a whole 6-week series on forgiveness, and I always feel like I have to clarify because it's so often misunderstood. But forgiving doesn't mean pretending that nothing happened or forgetting or saying that something that wasn't okay was. It doesn't mean having yourself or somebody else continue in a situation to be repeatedly abused in whatever way. You don't have to do those things to forgive, but you do have to forgive. It means saying that the offending party, they're released from whatever you feel like they owe you because of the wrong thing that they did. You don't have to get even, you're even. It's done. Here's a very real world one where I don't always know what exactly the best thing to do is for planting seeds of peace, but for sure I know what not to do is if you're on social media of your choice, whatever that is, and you see some sort of content that is not just that you don't agree with it, but something that's divisive and inflammatory and really damaging. I think you have a couple options. One of them that's always pretty decent is ignore it and move on. Consider that yielding to others, and you're not going to do anything to amplify their troublemaking. If you can do it, I think also an okay option is kindly, gently, graciously pointing to truth and kindness. If you can't do it kindly, gently, graciously, then for sure ignoring and moving on is going to be your better choice. If you can, then I don't know. I guess either one. You can pick whichever one you feel like is most appropriate. But I'll tell you what is not going to be planting seeds of peace is typing when you're angry, returning venom for venom, anything that's insulting or disparaging, or yourself even posting or sharing content that's going to be not planting peace and instead sowing division and inflammation. And I know somebody somewhere will disagree with literally everything, including being a peacemaker. Okay. Willing to yield. Okay. How about let's remember where this started. It was with the humility that came from wisdom. Humility isn't thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less, but you and whomever you might have to make peace with. Think about the two of you. How are you similar and how are you different? Here's who you are, is you're a sinner saved by the grace of God, and every bit and as much in need of that grace as any and every other person. Here's who they are, is a human being created in the image of God for whom Jesus went to the cross. I know that is so difficult to keep in the forefront of your mind, but if you do, if you can, I hope you feel how that reframes everything. I know that you're mad that they did something and it was wrong and it was hurtful and it was sinful and they shouldn't have done it. And for sure, Jesus would not have done it. And probably you're right. But how mad are you going to be at them that they're the person for whom sins Jesus died and not themselves actual Jesus who would never have done anything wrong? I know that's hard to keep in mind, but I hope that feeling and understanding those things, I hope that if you can feel that hope, create some gentleness and some mercy in you. And this, I don't know, if you've been following Jesus a long time, this might seem very, very elementary to some of you, but something I've actually been really trying to work on being conscious of recently is how much peace is created when you consider yourself and your life as not even your own, but it's belonging to God. That you wake up in the morning and you say, I'm here to serve God. I'm not for myself. And I know you might think that as a pastor, somehow that's like automatic for me or something. I promise you it's not. I promise you it is as easy for me to think about myself as it is for you to think about yourself. Absolutely, it's true. I know, and I look at myself and I don't know, of selfishness and jealousy. I don't feel like I have a whole lot of jealousy in me, but I mean, selfishness for sure. Oh, absolutely. And so here's what that means. It means my humility isn't complete. It means I don't have all of the wisdom that comes, that will lead to that humility. It means that I don't understand God's ways, and I am not wise in understanding of God's ways, and that I prove it every day by then not doing the good deeds that would come from that wisdom and that humility. But I'll say that at least it bothers me. And I think that's a good sign. I think that means that God isn't done working in me. And I probably shouldn't be so surprised that I have a long way to go, because really I think that's kind of the human condition for all of us as long as we are here in this life. And so I don't know if that sounds very familiar to you, if that sounds like you hear maybe some of those things and you think, oh, you know what? Yeah, me too. Then you know what? I think maybe that's a good sign that God isn't done working in you either. And so let's go forward together. We're going to be peacemakers, and it might cost us something. But we're going to reap a harvest of righteousness. You hear all kinds of what somebody calls or what may sound like wisdom. What do you do? How do you know? Does the early bird get the worm, or does the early worm get got? Do too many cooks spoil the soup, or do many hands make light work? Do opposites attract, or do birds of a feather flock together? What about eagles? They don't fly in flocks at all. They're not looking for worms. Owls hunt at night. Like, what does this mean? I'm so confused. I don't know. How can I tell? Here's how. Jealousy and selfishness are not God's kind of wisdom. Wisdom from God, it's pure, it's peace-loving, it's gentle at all times, it's willing to yield to others. It bears out in the real world by living an honorable life, by doing good works with humility. And you reap a harvest of righteousness from planting seeds of peace. Yeah, let's pray. Father, thank you so much that you give us the ability and the knowledge and the wisdom to receive your humility through seeing ourselves maybe a little more the way you see us and less the way we see ourselves, and all of our excuses for everybody else, and our excuses for ourselves and answers for everybody else, and that we are all level and we are all at the exact same place before you. People who you created and who you love, but broken and sinful and able to be loved and redeemed and forgiven through the performance, not of our own selves, but through your Son, Jesus. And if you're here still praying this morning, you've never taken that step to connect with God through Jesus Christ. The situation's really very simple and the same for every one of us. We all have sin. There have been things that were wrong. We knew they were wrong. We did them anyway. And God is a God of justice. And so how could a just judge just pretend that something didn't happen when it did? That would be a terrible, unjust God, an unjust judge. But that's why Jesus came and did for us what we could not do for ourselves. His death on the cross was him satisfying justice for our sin. That was your place and my place that he was in. And so that instead we receive mercy, and we take his righteousness and he takes our sinfulness, and we become forgiven, adopted children in the family of God forever. If that's you, if you want that to be you right here today, this morning, sitting here in the building, if you're watching online, you can pray and say to God out loud, or even just speak to him in your heart, and he'll hear and say, God, I believe that Jesus Christ came and died and resurrected so I could be forgiven and adopted as a child in your family. Please come into my life. Forgive me and adopt me. Begin to make me into the person you created me to be, and give me the life that you have for me. If you just prayed a prayer like that, it's not the words of the prayer that saves you, it's God's grace that comes to you through your faith in Jesus, and you are a new spiritual creation in Jesus Christ. The best thing you can do from here is not to try to live your new life by yourself. You're not created to live it by yourself. Let somebody know. You can go out to the point, that's the corner in the lobby, and let the person there know. They'll take your information. We'll be able to follow up with some good, healthy next steps in your new life with Jesus. If you're online, send us a message. And those of us who we've been walking with Jesus, we've been growing hopefully spiritually and in him, and probably in some of these ways, but it's awfully easy, I would like to think, for everybody to see in themselves some ways where they have some progress yet to be made, because these are difficult real life issues. I know they are. I'm not mad at you for not being perfect, but let's just take that next step together. And will you just open yourself up, and right now between you and yourself and the Spirit of God, will you commit to cooperating with him in whatever piece it is that he is speaking to you on and that stands out to you through this? If it's the way that you see others, if it's the way that you see yourself, if it's your tendency to stand up and not yield, or to make trouble and not peace, wherever that is, just between yourself and God, that you will be able to make, Father, through your Spirit working in us, these Sunday morning decisions into Monday through Saturday life change. Father, we love you and our lives are yours. In the name of Jesus Christ and for your glory.